Hi guys, I hope you're doing great. I know we've been missing in action, but now we are back. And in this video, I've covered a chapter from the PMBOK 7th edition. As you might know, the PMBOK 7th edition is now listed as one of the reference books for the PMP certification exam. So it is critical that you know at least some of the content from the book. So go ahead and check out this video on the stakeholder performance domains, which covers the tools, the methods, and the models associated with this domain. And please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. When you subscribe to our channel, you will get notified of all the new videos that we release. We here at careersprints.com make videos on everything project management. So let's dive in and learn the stakeholder performance domain. All right, so this is chapter 2 from the PMBOK 7th edition, and this is the stakeholder performance domain. So first of all, the stakeholder performance domain normally starts with talking about what exactly is the meaning of the term stakeholder, who are stakeholders, what do they do in a project. So if you understand what a project is basically a temporary endeavor. Right? To fulfill or accomplish a goal. Right, so that is the basic definition of a project. It is a temporary endeavor to fulfill or accomplish a goal or a strategic objective. And a project is undertaken normally by a group of stakeholders or a group of people who are coming together to accomplish this goal of the project. So, generally people who are working in the project, they are also called stakeholders. People who are outside of the project but can influence the project, they are also called stakeholders. So let's look at how PMI defines who or what a stakeholder is. So PMI says that an individual, a group, or an organization that may be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by a decision, activity, or outcome of a project, portfolio, or program is considered to be a stakeholder. So in simple terms, a stakeholder is a person who has a vested interest in the project. Right, so you can think of any project that is running in your company, or even if you look at the example of you doing the PMP certification exam, that is a project for you. You're trying to accomplish a goal, and there are different stakeholders who are involved in this process of you trying to get the PMP certification. So you have, if you take training from a training company, the training company is a stakeholder, so they can influence your performance because of the way they teach you. You have the certifying body, which is PMI. They are also a stakeholder because they govern the exam. You have the testing center, so where you will go and physically write the test. They are also a stakeholder. So, these are people who, can influence your project, or there are instances where even you can influence a project that is running in your company. So for example, let's say if a project is running in your company and you don't like the way the project is running, or you are opposing the project, then you can create some trouble for the project, or you can voice your opinion for the project, or you can point out some mistakes that are happening in the project, and you can also influence the project. So basically a stakeholder is a person who has some sort of interest in the project, and will get affected or can affect the project positively or negatively. So that is the basic definition of what a stakeholder is. And, because you have so many stakeholders in a project, especially if it's a big project, as a project manager, you need to do something known as a stakeholder analysis. Now, what is stakeholder analysis? Stakeholder analysis basically means understanding the power, the interest, the influence, the authority, etc., about the stakeholder. So, because stakeholders are basically people, right? So the people who are involved in your project or who have an influence on your project, they can either reduce the performance of your project or they can enhance the performance of your project. And because of these people, the project can suffer or it can benefit. So it is very important that as a project manager, you take into account all your major stakeholders, right? And you classify them depending upon their interest, depending upon their power, their influence, and their authority. So stakeholder analysis, if you look at the definition, it says It is a method of systematically gathering and analyzing quantitative and qualitative information to determine whose interest should be taken into account throughout the project. Now, like I said, in your project, your vendors could be stakeholders. The project manager himself or herself is a stakeholder. The project sponsor is a stakeholder. The team members are stakeholders. The other functional managers are stakeholders, etc., etc. Right? So as a project manager, it is critical that you carry out some form of stakeholder analysis as well. So it says this performance domains entails working with stakeholders to maintain alignment and engaging with them to foster positive relationships and satisfaction. Obviously, we want to ensure that our project runs smoothly. And to run our project smoothly, we need to ensure that we maintain a good relationship with a wide variety of stakeholders, especially with our investors, especially with our team members, because any of these people can have an impact on your project. For example, the project sponsor, if he is not happy with the project, he or she can cut off the funding for the project. The team members, if they are not happy with the way the project is being run or they are being micromanaged, then the team members may lose interest in the project, and thus the project may also suffer. So, to avoid these situations, it is important to maintain a smooth and a courteous working relationship with everyone on your project. Now, let's look at the different, steps in stakeholder analysis, and let's also understand a little more about stakeholders. So if you look at project stakeholders, there is an example that is given here, and I've taken this from the PMBOK. You would see that this shows you that the project manager, the project management team, the governing bodies, the PMOs, the steering committees, the suppliers, customers, all of these people are stakeholders. So stakeholders can be a few stakeholders. If it's a small project, maybe just a process improvement that you're doing within your team or within your department, but it can also range to having millions of stakeholders. For example, the COVID-19 pandemic affected the entire world. Everyone was touched by what was happening during the pandemic. So, that touched trillions of people, not only millions of people. So, and you will have different stakeholders in different phases of the project. So, when the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, hit, it pretty much just hit the people, it hit some hospitals. The healthcare facilities, the hospitals, the people, and the businesses were affected by it. But later, when it came to vaccine development, then other stakeholders got involved. For example, different governments got involved. Different vaccine manufacturing companies got involved, and so on and so forth. Right. So different stakeholders will also come and go from your project in different phases or different stages of your project, right? So as a project manager, you should keep a track of who is going to get involved in your project at what time, and how are you going to work with the person, collaborate with that person, manage that person to ensure that he or she is working for the benefit of your project. Okay, so let's talk about the definition of stakeholder engagement. So basically, stakeholder engagement means that you need to collaborate with stakeholders. You need to, monitor how the engagement is going with stakeholders, and you need to talk to your stakeholders. So you need to communicate, you need to collaborate, you need to constantly be working with your stakeholders. So there are many different strategies that you can use for stakeholder engagement. So, let's look at the definition. So it says stakeholder engagement includes implementing strategies and actions to promote productive involvement of stakeholders. So you want to ensure that stakeholders don't become disinterested in your project, or they, stakeholder engagement basically means collaborating, working with stakeholders, communicating with them, getting feedback from them, being in touch with them, providing them with information, getting their inputs. All of these things would basically mean that you are well engaged with your stakeholders. So these are the different steps, when it comes to crafting a stakeholder engagement strategy. So you're going to identify stakeholders, you're going to understand the mindset or the psyche of each of the stakeholders, or their influence on the project. You're going to then analyze your stakeholders, you're going to prioritize them, you're going to engage with them, you're going to monitor them, And this is a cyclical process that continuously is going to happen. You have to do it along with your project team throughout the course of your project. It's not a one-time activity. Okay, now let's look at each of the steps. So the first step is called identify stakeholders. So, generally, when you're beginning a project, you have to identify stakeholders right at the beginning of the project. Now, what do I mean by this? Basically, when you're starting a project, you probably are going to have a project investor or like a project sponsor. You're going to have some subject matter experts whose inputs you might need. So there are a few people that you at least need to identify before you even kick off or before you start your project. So some high level stakeholder identification happens right at the initiation stage or during the initiating a project process. Now, what I have done is while I have when I designed this presentation, I also ensure that I have linked it to the chapters that are there in the PMBOK 6th edition. So if you're using the 6th edition of the PMBOK, you will be able to draw correlations from what is being covered here in this in this presentation, and you'll be able to see similarities between the 7th edition of the PMBOK and the 6th edition of the PMBOK. So if you see, it says high level stakeholder identification may be carried out prior to forming the project team. So you just need inputs from different people. So you would need to identify some stakeholders. Now, the next step is that you understand and analyze your stakeholders. So, like I had explained earlier, you can use different types of models. For example, you can use like the salience model, to identify and classify stakeholders, right? And normally when you identify your stakeholders and when you are trying to analyze them, and once you analyze them, you would capture their information in a stakeholder register. A stakeholder register is basically just a document. It could be an online tool, it could be a project management tool where you've captured some information about that stakeholder. So what is the kind of information that you will capture? So you can capture their authority in the project, you can capture their their needs or their urgency in the project, you can capture how relevant they are to the project. Like some stakeholders may totally be disconnected to the project, like although they may be senior people in your organization, but their influence doesn't really matter on the project because they are not really connected to the project. So you will understand, their authority, their feelings, their emotions, their beliefs, their values, and just gather as much information, gather as much data as you want about your stakeholder so that you're better able to classify them and you're better able to manage them and engage with them. So if you see, here it says that even understanding and analysis of stakeholders is actually a step which was included in the identify stakeholder step in the PMBOK 6th edition. So although here they have split it out and, they have called it a separate step in the process, but it is still related to identification of stakeholders as per the 6th edition. So it says this information helps the project team consider interactions that may influence the motivations, the actions, and the behaviors of stakeholders. Right? So the more information you have about your stakeholders, the better would be your ability to manage them. Now, once you analyze your stakeholders, you will have a better understanding of your stakeholders. So once you have a better understanding of your stakeholders, you can then prioritize your stakeholders. Right? For instance, a lot of the vaccine manufacturing companies, when they manufactured vaccines, they prioritize stakeholders or countries, when I'm talking about the COVID-19 vaccine, they prioritize countries which were ready to make them upfront payments, right? So for instance, you would know that countries like the US or Canada, they got vaccines delivered much earlier than a lot of other developing nations. So similarly, in a project, you need to know who are your most critical stakeholders. So these could be people who have given more money to the project, and a lot of the projects are driven by financial gain and other factors. These could also be people who have a high authority and a high sense of urgency related to the project, so you would give them greater importance. So you basically have to create a list of stakeholders who have more power and influence and need of the project, right? So it's a collection of multiple factors, right? So once you do this initial prioritization, after that you will be able to then decide what to build for which stakeholder. So for example, if I've classified stakeholder A, B, and C as my top stakeholders, I'm going to ensure that the things that I build as part of my project, they definitely satisfy those stakeholders before the other stakeholders. Okay, so that is about prioritization. So after prioritization, obviously the next step would be engagement. Again, the engagement would be based on the prioritization that you have done. So anyone who has high priority, you would engage with them a lot more. So what do you mean by engagement? Engagement can mean multiple things. It could be eliciting project requirements. It could be setting the right expectations for these stakeholders. It could be resolving a stakeholder issue or a stakeholder concern. It could be negotiating with stakeholders. So for example, you could be negotiating with functional managers or maybe with the project sponsor to get more budget, for instance. It would be solving problems. So, if there is a critical customer that you have, who has a major impact due to the project, you're probably going to solve their problems first. So all of these different things you're going to do as part of engagement. And obviously, you're going to collaborate with stakeholders. You're going to actively listen to their concerns. You're going to ensure that conflict is being managed. So if you worked in an agile project, so you would know that in agile there is a concept called product owner, and product owners basically are the point of contact, or the liaison for most stakeholders on an agile project, right? So the project manager basically serves as a conduit for any features or any user stories that need to be built as part of the agile project. So the product owner is the main point of contact for all these stakeholders. So as a product owner, you need listening skills, interpersonal skills, ability to collaborate, build relationships, and so on and so forth. Okay. So let's talk a little more about engagement now. As a stakeholder, you have to communicate with people, right? So when you're communicating, communication can take different forms. There could be push communication and there can be pull communication. So push communication basically means, sending someone an email, dropping a voicemail, sending someone a text. All of these are examples of push communication, broadcasting some information, maybe, using like a YouTube video, for instance. So, there are many examples of push communication, where you're trying to push the information, you're trying to sell the information or provide the information by reaching out to stakeholders proactively. Then there is pull communication. Now in pull communication, it's the exact opposite of pushing. So here you have probably, uploaded the information onto the intranet, for instance. Maybe you have like an internal company intranet or maybe like a knowledge base, and people are able to search the information from that knowledge base. So, putting it on the internet, like, putting it on YouTube or writing a blog, I'm not really pushing the information. I am just writing it. Someone can find my information and can benefit from that information. So there is push strategy, there is pull strategy. You have to use a combination of both to be able to convince your stakeholders or get more engagement from them. So initially you may have to do a lot of pushing, but once a certain amount of pushing is done and people have seen your information, they have seen your emails, or they have been exposed to your information, then they may automatically want to come and pull from your website, for instance. So the basic idea is that you keep the interactions, you keep the communications interactive, and you have feedback loops that are built in. So, agile teams, for instance, have quick feedback loops, right? So they do frequent demos, they do frequent daily stand-ups. And when you do these daily stand-ups, when you do these demos, you get frequent feedback from your stakeholders as well. So the basic idea is that you confirm that stakeholders have heard the message. You determine that stakeholders agree with the message that you have communicated. So it's just not about sending the information. It is also about ensuring that the other person has understood the information and that they agree with what you have communicated to them. And then you have to understand what the stakeholders also perceived. Okay. And then finally, you have monitor. So when it comes to monitoring of the information, you will basically assess how the communication is actually happening, right? So what do we mean by this? So, once you have sent an email to someone, you should know whether the person read the email. A simple way to check this would be maybe to call up the person if you have their number. Right? Maybe you check on the person and ask them, whether you read the email, what you understood about the email, whether you agree to it or not, do you have any of your comments, and so on and so forth. So the project manager needs to constantly monitor how communications is happening. So, and whether people are understanding what you're telling them or not. So it says assess whether the current engagement strategy is effective or it needs to be adjusted. So as the project manager monitors the engagement strategy, so how do you know whether the engagement strategy is working or not? The basic question that you need to answer here is, are you getting the desired result from the communication that is taking place? If you're not getting the desired result, that means the communication is not effective and you need to do something different, right? So it says determine stakeholder satisfaction through feedback. So you can do surveys, you can have direct conversations, you can do retrospectives like the ones that are being done by agile teams. You can do forums where people can come and give feedback. You can do reviews, product demos, and so on and so forth. So this particular step is related to the monitor stakeholder engagement step from the PMBOK 6th edition. Okay. So basically, if you read the stakeholder performance domain, that pretty much sums up the stakeholder performance domain. But when you reach the end of the chapter, so whenever you're going to read the PMBOK 7th edition, when you reach the end of the chapter, you will see that they have a table at the end of each of the performance domains chapter. And that table looks something like this. So you have something known as an outcome and you have a check. So this table shows you what is the outcome that you would normally want to desire from a performance domain. So the whole idea of working with stakeholders is that you desire some form of outcome. So what do you want as an outcome? You want a productive working relationship with stakeholders. That is an outcome that you expect. And for example, you want to ensure that stakeholders who are project beneficiaries are supportive and satisfied with the project. So how do you check whether you've achieved that outcome or not? So PMI makes some recommendations in the PMBOK. So they say that to check whether you have a productive working relationship with stakeholders, you see whether the stakeholders are engaging with you or not. So if you have a working relationship or a good relationship, that means that the stakeholder will communicate with you. If they are not communicating with you enough, or if they are ignoring or avoiding you, then maybe you don't have a productive relationship with them. So this check column basically helps you understand whether you've accomplished your outcome or not. So when you are designing your stakeholder engagement strategy, you can take into account the outcomes that you wish to accomplish and how are you going to verify whether those outcomes are achieved or not. Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying this video and finding it to be useful. I also quickly wanted to let you know that you can access 2 free PMP chapter videos, which is more than 3 hours of content, just by signing up to our website. And what I've done is that I've left a link of it in the video description where it will say access 2 free PMP chapter videos. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, I would request you to do so. When you subscribe to our channel, YouTube will recommend all the new videos that we release. Now, please continue watching this video. Quickly talk about are the stakeholder performance domain tools. So, when we talk about any performance domain, you need to understand that in the PMBOK 7th edition, what they've done is that they've separated out the tools. They have a separate section which is called models, methods, and artifacts. And that's where you will find the information about tools related to the performance domains. So there are a couple of tools that are given, and I'll show you the page as well where you can actually go and see the tools. So, but let's go through the tools. So there are tools related to communication. There are tools related to, change management. So, generally when we talk about stakeholders, we are looking at communication, we are looking at change management. These are a couple of things that we are more interested in. And the reason why we are looking at change management tools, right, and communication tools is because, number one, we communicate with stakeholders. So the better we are able to understand how to communicate with stakeholders, the better it would be for our project. And we take into account change management tools because normally when we are doing a project, the entire goal of a project is to introduce change. Now, when people are introduced with change, they normally oppose the change because people don't like changing. So if you have an effective and a strategic change management system, you will just be able to better manage those changes. So we are going to primarily look at communication tools and change management tools. So the first communication method that we are going to look at is called cross-cultural communication. Now, what is cross-cultural communication? As the name suggests, cross-cultural basically means that you're communicating with people from different backgrounds, with people from different parts of the world, and normally when we are communicating across different cultures, as also represented in this picture, you need to tailor your communication style as well, right? So you may not want to communicate in the exact same manner with everyone because that may not be the most effective way to communicate. Now, the other thing to also understand is that we also have our biases when we are trying to communicate. Like normally, everyone, or a lot of people in the world, they judge other people based on the culture that the person belongs to or the country that the person comes from. So we have our biases, we have our influences. So it is important to understand our biases. It is important to understand the different cultures that people come from and then accordingly choose an appropriate communication style to ensure that we are able to communicate properly. So it says the message and its transmission is influenced by the sender's and the receiver's current knowledge, experience, language, thinking, and communication styles, as well as stereotypes and relationships. So I was talking about stereotypes and the things that we think, but there are other factors that would also influence, such as knowledge, experience, language, thinking, and communication styles. For example, if I'm communicating with someone from, let's say, a Spanish country like Mexico, then I may need to probably slow down my communication if the other person thinks that I'm speaking too fast, right? I may communicate in, like even if you look at the English language in different parts of the world, we may use different words to express the same thing in the same language. So like the way English is spoken in Australia would differ from the way it is probably spoken in the UK, from the way it is probably spoken in America. So I need to also understand these nuances. And these things can have an impact on the way I communicate. So that is cross-cultural communication. Now let's talk about the richness of communication channels. Right. So normally when you look at agile teams, agile teams prefer to do face-to-face communication. Right. And, when we talk about, communication, depending upon the tool that we use for the purpose of communication, we the richness of the communication would change, right? So if you see, there are there is an x-axis which says richness of communication channel, and then it says communication effectiveness. So basically, we can classify the different mediums of communication that we use, like paper, email, phone conversations, face-to-face communication, and we can classify them, or we can plot them on this graph, and we can see that how effective does the communication, how effective is that form of communication depending upon the type of communication channel that we use. So for example, if you use paper-based communication, which is, hardly anyone uses it anymore, that is not very effective. And, it is not also a very rich way to communicate. But when we use face-to-face communication, face-to-face communication is a rich communication method. Why? Because when we do face-to-face communication, you're able to see my body language, you're able to see how I'm reacting to something. I may also be using different kinds of hand expressions. There is a tangibility to face-to-face communication, especially, when I have to explain you about a complex topic, or I have to have a lengthy discussion or a complex discussion. Face-to-face communication would make more sense. But if I have to just, provide you with a report or send you just some, basic information, then I can maybe use phone communication, or I can just use email. So agile teams, because they work in a hyper competitive, and a fast-paced environment, they prefer to use face-to-face communication. So it says most effective communication is person-to-person communication, face-to-face communication, which is enhanced by using things such as a whiteboard, a flip chart, index cards. So if you've used a Kanban board or a Scrum board, you would know what I am talking about. Like if you've worked in an agile team, that is an example of, rich communication methods. Okay. Now, the next concept that I want to talk about is called the media richness theory. So basically, the media richness theory is similar to what I just explained to you. Now, in the media richness theory, what happens is that, this theory says that whenever you use any form of communication, the richness of that communication method is based on multiple factors. So what is rich communication? Rich communication basically means that I'm using, a wide range of vocabulary. I am, using different kinds of facial expressions. I am, modulating my voice. I am using personal focus. So I'm focusing on you when I'm talking to you. So, there are different ways that I can enhance the quality of my communication. So the media richness theory basically states that your capacity to include personal focus, the speed with which, or the immediacy with which you receive feedback, the conveyance of multiple cues, and a variety of language carried, these are all, impactful when it comes to rich communication. So rich communication would generally be more effective communication. For example, imagine a face-to-face debate that two people are having. For example, you would notice that, whenever an election happens in a country, normally the leaders would come face to face and they would debate about different topics. Now, when they do it, everyone who is in the audience, they can see how a person is reacting, what are they saying, whether they are really saying the truth, whether they are lying or whether they're just making up stories, so, that enhances the richness of the communication. And then people are able to make a more informed decision about who to elect or, who to vote for during the election. So this is called the media richness theory. And basically, these are the 4 factors that influence the richness of communication. So depending upon the type of communication that you want to have with someone, you will you will kind of look at the media richness theory, and you will see how you want to communicate with someone, whether via email, face-to-face communication, or another form of communication. So there's an example that's given. So it says that important decisions need to be discussed face-to-face rather than email. Entry-level positions with clear, unambiguous tasks to be fulfilled can be in written media form, right? So this is just an example. Now, the next concept that I will talk about is called the gulf of evaluation and the gulf of execution. This is actually a theory in UX design, right? Now, basically, this theory states that, this theory basically is trying to understand what is the difference between a user's expectation from a system and what the system actually does. So, let's look at the definition of the gulf of evaluation first. So it says it is the disparity between the user's perception or discovery of the system and the actual system state. So it says, what is the current state of the system? So basically, if you would see in this picture, it shows you the user and it shows you the system. And the gulf, the word gulf basically means, what is the gap or the difference? So when I talk about the gulf of evaluation, I'll give you an example. So let's say you go to a website, right? And, we understand that when there is a button on a website, that button, if you press, it is supposed to go to the next page, or it is supposed to open a pop-up window. It is supposed to do something. But when you click on the button and nothing happens, or something unexpected happens, then there is a difference between what you were expecting and what you actually got. So this is called the gulf of evaluation. Basically, the user is trying to understand what is the current state of the system, and the current state of the system could be different from what the user was expecting it to do. So you go and press the button and you are expecting it to take you to the next page, but that does not happen, or something unexpected happens. So that is the gulf of evaluation. Next is the gulf of execution. So it says it is the disparity between the user's perception of the required system interactions to achieve a goal and the actual system interactions required to achieve the goal. And then it goes on to say the difference between the user's perceived execution actions and the required actions is the gulf of execution. So I'll give you another example. Let's say you are, driving, and, a car. And let's say you have just moved from a manual to an automatic car. Now when you're moving from a manual to an automatic car, you probably don't know that you have to use a clutch. I mean, we all know that we have to use a clutch when we are driving a manual car, right? So we need to do the gear shifting manually. But when you move to an automatic car, there could be certain differences in the way the automatic car operates, which would be different from the way you were doing things in the manual car. So you would be thinking that if I do exactly the same actions that I do in the manual car, it would work exactly the same in an automatic car, but in reality, that may not happen. So, this is about the difference between, the user's expectation of how a system should work and what the system expects you to do for it to work. So that is the gulf of execution. So there is the gulf of evaluation and there is the Gulf of execution. So in the Gulf of evaluation, the user is just trying to understand what is the current state of the system. But in the Gulf of execution, the user is trying to understand how do I use the system. Like if I move from a manual to an automatic car, I would not know how to use the system, right? Maybe someone has to explain it to me, or I need to actually watch a YouTube video to understand how to actually drive a manual, an automatic car. So this is the concept that is used in UX design, and you need to understand that these days a lot of our stakeholders are actually using websites. They are using the internet to access the information. So when we are designing websites, when we are designing mobile applications, we need to take into account these things as well. So if there is a major behavioral change that is expected from the user when he or she is trying to use the system, that needs to be explained to the user through a video or something. So that is that is another model. Now, the next thing we are going to talk about are change models. So there are different change models that we are going to talk about. So we're going to talk about the ADKAR model. We're going to talk about the 8-step process for leading change. We are going to talk about managing change in organizations. We are going to talk about the transition model. And we are going to talk about the salience model, which is a model that is used in stakeholder analysis. So I'm just going to quickly run through all of these models. I'm not going to explain to you in a lot of depth. You can read about it more on the internet. But for the PMP exam, this is, you just need to know it at a high level. So let's look at the ADKAR model. So the ADKAR model basically stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So whenever a change is happening, whenever you're trying to change something in your organization, whenever you're trying to do a project which is trying to introduce a change, stakeholders are going to get impacted by it. So in that sense, you need to have a model to manage that change. So let's take the example of COVID-19. So when COVID-19 happened, we were all advised that we need to wash our hands really well so that, we don't infect ourselves and then land up infecting other people. And that way we are able to stop the spread of the infection. So the first thing in this model was to understand or get an awareness of what we need to do. Now, when we talk about, awareness, it says healthcare officials stressing the importance of hand washing, right? So first of all, we need to know that we need to wash our hands, right? Some people don't wash their hands. So that is awareness. Next is desire. Now, the thing is, you're telling people to wash hands, but why would they want to wash hands? You need to tell them that this is not a regular scenario where you don't wash hands and you'll be fine. Here you are faced with a infection, which can take away your life, right? So you have to help them understand what is in it for them. So that is desire. Next is knowledge of how to change, right? So many people know that they need to wash hands, but we don't know how to wash hands. For example, if we just wash our hands for like 1 or 2 seconds, right? Or maybe lesser time, then that is not enough. We need to wash our hands thoroughly. So it says effective and recommended method is 20 to 30 seconds scrub with soap. So, providing people with the right knowledge, with the right training is critical when you are trying people to make people to change. Next is ability. So, just telling people that they need to wash hands is not enough when you do not provide them with water and soap to wash hands. So if you don't have a facility where proper soap and water is available, right, then it doesn't make any sense. So it says hand soap is available in ample supply, but hand sanitizer can be harder to find or prohibitively expensive for some people to use. So you need to ensure that you demonstrate the ability to incorporate this kind of change in behavior. And then finally, you have reinforcement. So reinforcement is that, you keep communicating to people the reason why they need to wash their hands. By doing that, they are reducing the spread of infection to themselves and to other people as well, including their family members. So that is the ADKAR model. So first you create an awareness, then you create desire, then you provide them with knowledge, then you create ability or you create capabilities to demonstrate those skills and behaviors, and then finally you reinforce the change. So that is the ADKAR model. Next is the Kotter's 8-step process for leading change. So basically this is a very famous model like the ADKAR model, and it has 8 steps that leaders can use to make changes in an organization. So this model is used very effectively in when you're trying to move from a predictive to an agile model, for instance, right? Or when you're trying to introduce any major change in your company. So the steps are: create a sense of urgency. So create a sense of urgency means creating a need to introduce that change in your organization. So you tell people why that change is needed. You drive a business case, or you explain to them the business justification for having to change. So that is creating a sense of urgency. Next is building a guiding coalition. So building a guiding coalition basically means that you are building a team that will drive the change. So this could be, a bunch of senior leaders in your company. So that is the meaning of building a guiding coalition. Next is, form a change vision. So, once you have a high level vision that is in place, you can further refine it and create a vision or an idea that you can sell to people. Right? So form a change vision, and then you communicate the vision. So basically you constantly need to communicate through different ways, through television, through, written documentation, through emails, through meetings, think of all the different ways that you can communicate the vision to people. The next thing is, getting people into action. So brand action basically means, getting people into action. So basically what you're doing is that you're creating capabilities so that people can work with the change. Right? This is actually the execution of the change itself. And then you create some short-term wins. So for example, you can have some celebrations or parties, when you accomplish a goal. So for example, you can get people to come on a call and they can share their success with the rest of the team. That is a great way to create some short-term wins. Or you can gift your team something whenever they accomplish a goal or a or of a goal of a sprint in an agile project, for instance. So you create some short-term wins and then you sustain the momentum. So how do you sustain the momentum? You can constantly keep communicating. You can create more incentives for people to continue changing. You can communicate the vision even more to other teams or to other people in your organization, and so on and so forth. And then finally, you will institute the change in your organization. So how do you institute a change? You can institute a change by changing policy, by changing incentive structures, by rewarding the right kind of behavior, etc., etc. There are several different things that you can do to institute the change as a permanent feature or a permanent fixture in your organization. So these are the 8 steps. Next is you have managing change in organizations. This is very similar to the 8 steps that I explained. Again, you will formulate and define the change, you will plan the change, you will implement or transition the change, and then you will sustain the change. So if you look at these steps here, they kind of map with the steps that I just explained here. So this information is also given in the PMBOK 7th. So I'm not going to elaborate on it too much. You can read through it. Now, the next model that I want to talk about is called the William Bridges transition model. So basically in this model, you have, this is called a transition model because you're trying to transition people from one state to another state. So basically this model has 3 stages. So stage 1 is ending. Stage 2 is the neutral zone. and stage 3 is the new beginning. So basically, what do they mean by ending? So ending means the ending of the current state and the beginning of the new state. So, normally whenever a big change happens in our life, for example, like I moved to Canada in 2016, for instance. And, I was living in India and then I moved to Canada. And, when I moved to Canada, I ended a phase of my life that is, for instance, living permanently in India. And when I migrated to this new country, it was a huge change for me. And, a lot of the things that I did in India that significantly changed when I was, living in a different part of the world. So that is the meaning of endings, for instance, right? So you're ending the current state. And then, when you have ended a phase of your of your company or a phase of your life, then you enter the neutral zone where the change is happening in this stage. So, for instance, when I migrated, I learned a lot of new things. I learned how to communicate the way, communication is done in a different part of the world. I learned, how to do other things, like, for example, how to drive, because the way I was driving in India is very different from the way I would drive in a Western country. So many different things changed. And, it takes a while to adjust to this new change that is happening with your life. And then finally, you have accept and embrace the change. So, once, you have been in the neutral zone for a while, maybe a couple of years or a couple of months, then you will accept and embrace the change. Now, how quickly you accept and embrace the change depends on the size and the magnitude of the change. So it really depends on the size and the magnitude of the change. So this is the transition model, because you're transitioning from one phase to another phase. And then finally, this is the last slide, with regards to this chapter. And this is called the salience model. The salience model is basically a model that is used to classify stakeholders. Right? This is normally used when you are identifying and analyzing stakeholders. And you would see that in the salience model, you have, it looks like a Venn diagram, and the word salience means noticeable. Now, what do I mean by noticeable? Basically, you're using the salience model to classify your noticeable stakeholders. So any stakeholder who is noticeable, that means that stakeholder is important and you need to pay more attention to that stakeholder. So basically, there are three variants, or there are three categories that you will use to classify your stakeholders. So you have the power, the legitimacy, and the urgency that you would use for the purpose of classifying your stakeholders. So authority, so power is defined as authority. So it says authority and influence in the organization and on the project outcome. That is the meaning of authority. Legitimacy means their involvement is appropriate. So the involvement of the stakeholder is appropriate. And urgency means that the stakeholder needs to be attended to urgently or immediately. So time criticality, time sensitivity is the third variable when it comes to classification of stakeholders. So basically, you would use these three categories to define your stakeholders as dominant, definitive, dormant, discretionary, dangerous, demanding, or dependent. So you would notice that any stakeholder who has a high power and who has a high urgency is a dangerous stakeholder. So you need to really pay attention to this person, because this person can jeopardize your project in a way where your project can totally get derailed. Okay, so this is the salience model. So this brings us to the end of all that I wanted to discuss about the stakeholder performance domains and the tools that are used in it. So do you have any questions for me? I explained quite a few concepts. So if you have any questions for me regarding whatever I've touched upon, please feel free to ask. So guys, if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer it. Let me know. Yes, Jidesh, it will affect the project. In many projects, stakeholders come and go, like people resign from the company, the project manager changes. So many things happen because projects can have a long lifespan. So definitely, a change in stakeholders will affect the project. That is why, it is better to do projects in shorter bursts. Like agile projects, for example, are done in 3 to 6 months. So, in those kind of projects, there is less change. There is at least less opportunity for, stakeholders leaving the project, and hence, it is better for the project. So it is better to not change stakeholders, but that can always happen. People always come and go in a project. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And before you leave, please do not forget to get free access to 2 free PMP chapter videos. The link of it is in the description of this video.